In this course, we use some screens, but without focusing on their design. And for the most part, what we've been developing, although we may not have realized it, was part of the application's back office. Thus, by applying the work with pattern to transactions, we have screens to manage the data. Let's apply the pattern to the transactions that don't have it yet. With this, GNexus will add these other work withs to the drop-down menu. Let's run it to see. Let's first look at this procedure that we didn't create ourselves, list programs. This is the one that will provide the items for that drop-down menu. This is where GNexus will have added the new work widths to the menu. Here we see all the generated work widths. Let's run one of them, for example, the flights one. Here we see the web panel created by the pattern, which calls the transaction. We see the drop-down menu on the side that allows us to run any of these other work widths: airports, attractions, categories, countries, customers, flights, tours. The menu is collapsible, but it only included the work with web panels. If we wanted to add our own web panels, the ones we've been creating, like this one, Airports List, how would we do it? Let's look for that procedure, List Programs. Here, the menu items are loaded into a collection. Let's add the one we're interested in as the first item. This is the name of the object. Here is the description, which is what we'll see in the menu. And this is the link to the object. Let's run it. We see that the only thing that needs to be regenerated is this program. Let's run any of the work with programs. We see the item we added, and if we click it, it opens that web panel. It opens in this area of the screen. So, where does all this other stuff come from? For example, this text, application name. Clearly, it's there to be customized. We want it to say travel agency. If we look at the properties of the web panel we just loaded in the central area of the screen, we find this one, master page, with this value. It's a special object, the master page, which comes predefined so that the back office already has an initial version. If we open it, this is where the side menu will be loaded. And this control is the one that indicates that here, the content of the page that has this as its master page will be loaded. It's this text block that we saw during execution and that we now want to customize so it says travel agency. Let's run it. Here we see it. If we choose another menu item, we still see the same thing, because the master page is the same for all the objects. And what about this text here? Where should we go to find it in order to change it? To the master panel. Here we see it among the events. What does an animal mean? It's the name of the predefined design system. The design system is what gives aesthetic and behavioral uniformity to the entire application. Let's observe that. All graphical interface objects have this object name in their style property, which matches the name of the KB. We see a transaction, a web panel created by us from scratch, the web panel created by the pattern, all of them have this object. If we go to the properties of the KB, there we see it as the default style. This object is created automatically with the KB, with its name. Here we see it. It has this section of tokens, which are constants that we give a name to, so we can use them later in the styles section, which are like CSS classes. This object is called design system. It is the one defining the entire style of our back office. As we can see, it is importing another design system object, Unanimo Web. Where do we find it? Under References, inside the GNexus Unanimo module, read only. Here appear the objects that implement the Unanimo system. There we find Unanimo Web. When we open it, we see the token section with just a few tokens and the style section with several class specifications, but we can already see that it is also importing other design system objects. In particular this one, Unanimo, which is the foundation for the entire system. When we open it, we see that the tokens section is very populated, as is the styles section. This one does not import any other design system. It is the base of the tree. We see class specifications for different controls. For example, here we see the button class, which will govern all controls associated with it. So, for instance, here we see the property that sets the background color for controls of this class. What is this value? A color token, that is, a constant defined in the token section. This way, we can clearly see the definition of the system's colors through tokens. For example, we see the purples that visually dominate the application. For instance, let's look at this token named, with a certain mood, accent secondary. It's a dark purple. Let's try changing it to green. We can't do it here because this object is red only. We have to do it in the specific design system of our KB. So let's overwrite the token that comes from a certain mood. To do this, we add a color token with this exact name. And there we define its value in hexadecimal. We can also do it from the graphic editor. Let's run it to see the effect. Alright, with this, we can deduce that this color token was used in several classes to define various background colors. Now, let's take a closer look at the design of these particular texts, which prominently appear in the word widths, but also significantly in the transactions. Where is it defined that they all have this color, this size, this uniform typography? If we open any word width, this one for example, and edit the properties of the text block control, which is the one we're interested in, we see that it has this class defined, heading 01. If we open any transaction and look for this other text block we were interested in, we see that it has the same class associated with it. It's that class which determines the design we see at runtime. Where is that class? Either in the design system object of our application or in the one it imports. Unanimo Web, in turn, imports these others. Unanimo was the base. If we go to its styles section and use Ctrl F to search for heading, there we see the class with the properties it has configured. In particular, we see the color property. The value of the property can be a hexadecimal value, an RGB, or a default color name, for example, or as in this case, a reference to a color token, which is what defines its value. Since we can't modify this design system object because it's red only, what we'll have to do to change the color property or any other property is define it in our own object so that our definition takes precedence over the other one. So we can copy the entire class specification, for example, paste it into our DCO, design system object, and change the value, for instance, by directly setting the predefined color green. We can comment out all these properties so that the ones from the Unanimo DCO still apply and then run it. There we can see the green in action. This is a small yet comprehensive example of precisely how the design system truly works, effectively defining the entire color system, but also shadows, visual spacings, distinct font families, and other elements through design tokens. And then, consistently using those tokens in the classes that apply to the controls on the screens. If we want to set a particular case, for example, let's suppose we want the grid of this web panel to have a background with a specific color different from this one. For example, the one corresponding to the green 100 color token. But we only want this grid to have it. If we edit the properties of the grid control, we see that it has this as its class, grid. We look it up in Unanimo. And here it is. If we copied this class to our DCO and only change the value of the background color class, this change would apply to all controls that have this as their class. That's not what we want. We want it to apply exclusively to this and only this grid control. So we can create a new class. For example, call it grid secondary, which effectively overrides the default value of the background color property, thereby adopting the specific color that genuinely comes from the designated color token that is not explicitly found within this particular DCO, but rather is inherently present in the imported Unanimo, and that indeed is its precise name. Let's proceed to carefully copy its name for future reference. And reference it here. And for the rest of the properties, they should be the ones that come from the grid class. And what are we missing? Change the class of this grid to the new one. Let's run it. Good, we see the background just as we wanted. Up to this point, we've introduced the main ideas for customizing the back-office design. Now we might ask about the application for end users. In a previous video, we mentioned that among the samples you can download from the homepage, there's one for a travel agency. Let's call this KB that way. Alright, now we have the sample KB, which has a back office very similar to ours, although smaller, and with a web panel home as the main object. And it also has the application for the end user implemented, but instead of using .NET for the front end, it's in Angular. This application was developed from scratch. It has a master panel, which is like the master page of the back office we saw earlier, except this one is not provided by default. It had to be created explicitly. And here we have a panel, which is like a web panel that will implement the screen we will soon see running. Loaded inside the master panel. All those controls you see in the layout, as well as those in other interface objects, have the style that comes from their classes, which are defined in these design system objects that were created from scratch by the developer. Here, for example, the developer created this base DCO where we can see the color system, which in this case will predominantly feature greens. Let's take a quick look at the Styles tab. It's not very populated. Instead of run, let's start by launching a build all so that both this application and the back office one are built. That will take a little longer, but we'll have everything built. It's not mandatory. We could have just run the customer-facing application. As expected, it will ask us to create the database tables. It's just these 4. Let's skip this part. It's finished here. Let's see that it automatically ran some data providers to populate the tables with data. We didn't see this in this course, but let's look at the properties of the transaction, specifically those in this group. Data. I encourage you to look into them. Now let's request to run the Attractions panel. It offers us the Run option, because the object was declared as main. Otherwise, that option would be disabled. Alright, let's skip this construction part and go straight to the end. Let's click to run it. Here we see that Attractions panel, which is also running the master panel we saw earlier, the one that sets up this header and the menu. and the chat button where we see a chat running that calls an agent to answer the user's queries and commands. We can see the predominance of greens from the design system. The master panel also sets up this footer here. And the actual page itself, the attractions page, which loads inside that master panel. It's this one in the middle where we see all the tourist attractions loaded into the system. This is implemented within a grid. Each attraction has its photo, name, a description, a weather status that is fetched from an API, and we also have this field here for semantic searches. For example, this one. In this case, we built everything from scratch. The entire application, creating the panels and the DCOs with their classes and colors. This was a small sample to understand what's behind the scenes. But of course, we have the possibility to automatically import designs created in design tools like Figma, whether by humans or by artificial intelligence. For that import to be effective, the files must follow certain conventions. That automation will produce something very similar to what was done here manually. So why study it then? Because in order to be able to edit what has been done, we need to understand the basics of what's behind it. And this applies to everything we've seen in this course. We invite you to continue exploring GeneXus and its ecosystem.